It is an absolute cracker of a weekend. Of course, we've done a preview on Liverpool against Man City, but Aston Villa are up against Tottenham this weekend as well. Fourth playing fifth. You've got Aston Villa with 55 points and Tottenham with 50 points, but Tottenham have got a game in hand. I want to get your views on the game, of course, in time. But in terms of the season so far, are both these guys where you kind of thought they would be? Are you impressed? Are they overachieving this season?
I would have probably had them the other way around. Spurs 4th, Villa 5th. But also, this is me saying this as if I said this at the start of the season. I definitely didn't. I'm pretty sure I had Villa at 8th. And I'm pretty sure I had likes of Brighton and Newcastle further up the table. But considering everything that's happened this season with all the injuries and everything, the fact that Villa have been pretty injury-free in key areas, say Watkins and Emi Martinez, they are where I expect them to be across the board. If I was a Spurs fan at the moment, I'd be very, very content with where they are because they've had so many injuries. There was a point, if you remember, they practically couldn't field an 11, and now they've got themselves in this situation where they're definitely in the top 4 race. So let's
stick with injuries actually, because I think for Aston Villa, they've had a tough time with it. Buendia and Mings have been out for the whole season pretty much. Jacob Ramsey that's been away for a long time as well. The big one at the moment, Kamara, despite having a great midfield in terms of names there, McGinn, Tielemans and Douglas Luiz, who we spoke about last week, who's had an unbelievable season. Kamara is so important in terms of sort of safeguarding this team from a defensive point of view. Tottenham, in terms of the big misses, as you said, so many injuries for them at one stage of the season. They're getting pretty much close to full strength. It's just two who I guess are important in terms of Pedro Porro and Richarlison. That injury to Kamara, how do you feel about that when it comes to Aston Villa, how they want to play, and in particular someone like Douglas Luiz who's had so much more freedom this year, and we've seen the goals from that?
Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, I think the Kamara injury was big, but I don't think it was as big as any of the injuries that have faced the teams around them, if I'm being completely honest. I think Douglas Luiz is a perfect, capable replacement for Kamara. He's absolutely fantastic. John McGinn as well. He can go forward, he can go back, he can do all of that. And I think we were all a little bit worried about Tielemans at the beginning of the season because he looked really, really off it. But the last few months, he's taken the mantle. And I think that midfield three of Luiz, McGinn and Tielemans is almost as strong as anything you'll see out of the top 3 in the league.
I've got to disagree a little bit. I feel like having him and his defensive stats are so impressive this year, to then let the others kind of go, and especially when they want to go and break. I think we've seen a bit more. Douglas Luiz is that little bit deeper, kind of staying to the left-hand side, and McGinn on the right-hand side, and they can cover for each other. They're still a great team. I do feel like that's a big miss, especially when you start to play teams like Tottenham, who are going to have a lot of players, and someone like Maddison getting into those areas of the pitch that he's a bit of a ghost in there, and he has that free role. I do fear about that, and a Spurs side that is really, really going to push up on Aston Villa. But this game's probably going to be played right in the middle of the pitch because both teams love that high line, don't they?
I think on that point, the one thing I would say has changed ever so slightly this season is the demands of the number 6. Like if you look at Spurs, it's been Basuma at times this season and Pape Sarr. I would actually argue that the position of the 6 that we saw last year, say Rodri play, is almost like fading away a little bit. Now we're asking this 6 to be like an all-action midfielder. And so like where Maddison will always pick up pockets, sometimes he drifts left, sometimes he drifts right. In Unai Emery's side, they're actually asking the centre-backs to go, you go and look after him. Let our 6 do what he wants to do. So in that regard, I think it'll be, yes, an interesting battle. But also, as you said, the middle third of the pitch is not going to be busy at all in this game. It's going to be Spurs' box and Villa's box and who can hit it direct and who can play the more aggressive and on the front foot. I do think the one area where Spurs are going to really miss someone is Pedro Porro. He's almost played like the Trent role for Spurs at times this season, coming inside, and because of his quality in possession, he can help you break lines from deep areas. That has worked against Villa for any team that's beaten them, essentially. Manchester United being one of the examples. That's where Villa are extremely weak this season.
Let's move on to the attack here, because in the game earlier in the season, it was fantastic. Both teams had 4 big chances in the game. Villa sneaking the victory at the end of it all. You've got 2 strikers here, Ollie Watkins and Son, who have been 2 of the best this year. Who do you think will get more joy in this one? So we've got, as I just said, Ollie Watkins currently has 16 goals and 10 assists this season. Only Harry Kane with 32 has more goal involvements across the top 5 leagues. He's got one more goal involvement than Mbappe this year as well, just to show how well he's done. And then Son, in terms of his return to form, his conversion rate's really strong, 23%, which is a bang-on marker for what you'd want. You'd always want over 20% for a striker. And he's got 13 goals from next year of only 7.66. So, do you think it will come down to these two? Because if you think they're all squished together and two exciting attacking units, it could come down to these two, right?
I think for Aston Villa, I think Watkins is probably the more important figure for them. I think he's the only player who has the potential to catch Erling Haaland, maybe Mohamed Salah now he's back fit, but he's obviously had an incredible season. And I think a lot of their play goes through him and is focused towards him in the same way probably that Spurs' would be if Richarlison was fit. I think that's a big miss. Before the knee injury, had 9 goals in 9 games, but If you look at Spurs and you look at the last 20 minutes of the game against Palace at the weekend when they had Brennan Johnson, Son sort of up front but kind of playing that false 9 role, and then Timo Werner, that's just pace. And I think that front 3 is probably the best way that Spurs are going to get at Villa. I don't think everything needs to go through Son. I think Son can push back a little bit. He can play Werner in behind. I know he might not be the best finisher, but he's creating chances over and over again. He can play Brennan Johnson in. And I think those 3 will work really, really well together. I think for Villa, it's more important for Watkins to have a very good game and for Watkins to take his chances than it is for Spurs, for Son to take his chances.
That's a great point on Richarlison, with the fact that for him, he's also, struck gold and got more comfortable in that central position. And with Son back in the team, that gives you an option of, instead of having Werner, who's, obviously lightning, but sometimes lacks that composure, to have that little bit more of a subtlety in terms of someone like Son playing out on that left-hand side. So that's why, maybe it's one where Watkins doesn't have the same amount of options. Give me a prediction, but also who's going to finish higher out of these two?
I mean, I just said before we started recording, I think Spurs will still finish higher. I think I've said this since the start of the season. Villa fans are getting very annoyed at me. But at some point, it's going to stop. You can't keep going like this. European competitions will run deep at some point. I do just think...
Villa at home, if they win this, they're 8 points clear.
Yeah, if they win, game in hand, they win this, they should finish 4th. But I do think Spurs will finish 4th. For this particular game, I think it'll be a draw. I think there'll be loads of goals. 2-2, loads of chances. Spurs, I think, if you offer them a draw right now, I think they take it.
I think it's so up for grabs here. I think the other thing to remember, of course, Conference League as well. So, maybe a bit of tiredness from that. Tottenham obviously have a full week at it. The one thing I'll say about I think Villa will win this one. And I think Villa will finish 4th. And I'll tell you why. Because the games that Tottenham have got left are very, very difficult. I think they've got a huge say in the title race, but I think they've got to play the top 3.
Yeah.
And they're not going to win all 3 of those. Feel free to clip it up. I think it could be Villa's weekend, especially at home. What do you think?
I think in the same way that City against Liverpool is potentially a title decider, for me this is the Champions League decider. And I only say that because if Villa win, I know Spurs will have a game in hand, but they'll be 8 points ahead with 10 games to go. You'd have to fancy them to get top 4. I don't think they will win. I think Spurs will win this game. I think Spurs were very unlucky in the first game.
Hey, yeah. Good mentality. I
think they were very unlucky in the first.
That's what Andrew's saying in the dressing room.
No, I think they were very unlucky in the first game. I think they had the better chances, and I think that's when they were at their most exciting. And I think now with Maddison back and clicking, I think for me, I think Spurs under Big Ange this season are the most exciting team to play. And I think the way that Son is coming back in now, Brennan Johnson's playing, Werner was a fantastic buy, I think. With Maddison behind, it's a formidable 4. I think they'll beat Villa and I think they'll get top 4.